So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim...
Atheist and agnostic as well as many.
Are you ready for the end of the world?
No, I'm not even a little bit prepared. Are you?
I'm as ready as I was 5 years ago. How about that?
Were you prepared 5 years ago? No. Well, yeah, we're about to prepare you for the end of the world on
the Holy Watermelon Podcast.
So this was a listener request. Thank you, Sarah, for requesting the Revelation of John episode, which is why we talked about prophecy 2 weeks ago to segue into a more specific prophecy.
Yeah, this one's juicy. Good call.
That's a really odd way to put it, but I see where you're getting at.
Right?
I thought it was really fucking weird.
Right? I've mentioned before, and I'll bring it up again. It bugs me so much when people call it revelations, especially since an awful lot of the people who call it revelations are people who are happy to tell you that they have read it.
Just not the title.
I guess not the title. It's
like Harry
the
Potter
Revelation.
and the philosophy you rock.
Sure. It's the Revelation of John. Also sometimes called the Apocalypse of John, which...
Not accurate.
I mean, well, we've went and changed the definition of the word apocalypse, which is the real problem. The Greek word apocalypse means revelation. But because the book describes what feels like the end of the world as we know it...
We've now associated apocalypse with the end of the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's... I'm going to call it cultural illiteracy.
Okay.
If you hear a word used way too often and you never actually learn what it means, you start applying it to this new context that you do firmly associate with the word.
Immaculate. We've done that with the word immaculate.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, that's how languages evolve, broadly speaking, in general. But there's a few cases where it's just super annoying. And, I mean, I've gotten used to people describing the end of the world as the apocalypse. Fine, whatever. But it is technically wrong.
Okay. If you really want to know Preston, hop onto our Discord and write Revelations over and over again.
Yeah, it's like when somebody wants to quote a psalm, they'll say Psalms 119, whatever. I'm like, no.
It's a singular psalm.
It's if you're referring to just one psalm, drop that final S. It is the book of the Psalms. And maybe that's why people do that with the Revelation.
Maybe.
Because the Revelation is sometimes looked at as though it contains several separate revelations. But that's still wrong.
Well, it is kind of multiple. We found in our research, I mean, I feel like you probably knew this before, but from Britannica, they said that it is a collection of separate units composed by multiple authors.
Yeah, the scholarship on this book is actually really fascinating. And there's an awful lot of scholars who feel very confident now that it is a large composite work.
I mean, we'll get into this further, but even just how much of the Revelation is supplemented by other books of the Bible. Mm-hmm. I want to say it was grasping at straws, but it really feels like they were pulling from other places.
The Revelation really relies heavily on a few of the Old Testament prophets, especially Ezekiel and Daniel. But there's also loads of other little ideas that get pulled from, some imagery that gets used from Isaiah even as well. Yeah,
well, and you'll see later on, I cited Matthew quite frequently for how they describe the end of the world. Yeah, because anyway, I went down a rabbit hole and it was terrifying. Do you know any research on who John was? Because I assumed it was John the Apostle. And then I read that there's no indication that it was John the Apostle.
There's an awful lot of scholars who are very confident that there's no possible way that John the Apostle could be John of Patmos. John of Patmos being the identifier within the text for who wrote the Revelation. And it's kind of weird. They do have some similarities in their language. Both of them continue to use Aramaic words instead of being smooth Greek. But other than that, we have the same first name. That's really kind of it.
And I mean, back then, everyone was named John.
Johanan was a very popular name among the Hebrews, among the Judean people and the diaspora.
But I actually found sources that said John the Apostle was exiled to Patmos, and John of Patmos is John the Apostle.
Yes.
And then I found, like I said, on Britannica says that there's no indication that there's the same person. So some of the more wild interpretations of Revelation, I really feel like they're just making shit up, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. Identifying John is really tricky. There's loads of doubt, and there's some pretty good reasons for that doubt that they're the same person. There are some churches who will say explicitly, this is John the Apostle, it is John the Revelator, they're the same person. And there are other churches that are a lot less committed to that idea because they just tend to stick with the popular scholarly opinion, which makes perfectly good sense.
I mean, I agree with that.
Right?
So I found on Wikipedia is basically the different ways Christians interpret the Revelation. And I found this really interesting. So I think we should speak to those.
Yeah.
So there's 6. I'm trying to count.
Yes, there are 6 different categories.
6 different categories. So number 1 is Historicism, which sees the Revelation as a broad view of history.
Basically just kind of covering things up. The 4 horsemen are usually, when looked at as historical representations, they're meant to cover the 4,000 years leading up to that point in history where this book was written.
So the broad view of history is not a specific event. It's sort of a summary of all the stuff that's happened in the world so far.
Yeah. It's large, loosey-goosey, and when we talked about prophecy a couple weeks ago, we talked about how it was super obvious that the prophecy of the popes was a forgery because it was super specific up until the point of publication and then vague and cryptic afterwards. Here in this text, we have vague and cryptic for the history if we want to go with this historic interpretation of the book.
Yeah. The second one is preterism. So this is where you believe Revelation refers to the events of the 1st century or at the latest, the fall of the Roman Empire. So it's very specific time in history as opposed to a broad history of the world history.
Yeah. And that does fit pretty nicely with the broad use of apocalyptic literature where it's, hey, we're an oppressed people, but we're going to overcome our oppressors and everything's going to be great. And the fall of Rome, not in the terribly distant future for these people.
Mm-hmm. The next is amillennialism. So this rejects any sort of literal interpretation of the Revelation and just sees it as symbolic, which I like because it's going to get weird.
Yeah, and they also reject the idea of there being a 1,000-year period of peace after all of this happens, which is explicitly mentioned within the text, so it gets a little bit tricky.
But I guess if it's all symbolic, then it doesn't matter if you say something explicitly.
Yeah, you could just say millennium. Oh, he just means for a long time.
Yeah, it's still
like
symbolic.
Any time we talked about Moses in 40 years probably was just a long time.
Thank goodness, because to be lost in that desert for 40 years is unacceptable. Postmillennialism rejects the literal interpretation as well and sees the world becoming better and better, with the entire world eventually becoming Christianized.
Makes sense well enough.
I was going to say, where's your commentary, Preston?
That's
okay.
I'm satisfied.
Okay. Futurism believes that the revelation describes future events, so an actual revelation.
So
These are also called millennialists.
Yeah, and that's probably most people who are concerned with the book of Revelation. This is where most of them seem to sit, where they're looking forward to the end of the world as they know it in all of these cataclysmic events. And some of them are very fearful. And yeah, futurism.
I'm just going to say there's going to be a point in this podcast where I don't know if I can be nice anymore.
We'll see.
We'll see. I'll try. And the last one is idealism or allegorical, which refers to the revelation as not an actual event, but an allegory of your spiritual journey. This one I can get behind too.
Yeah.
Some of them I can't get behind.
Some of the symbolism in there gets really
specific,
alarming for a personal journey.
I just think it's an acid trip at some point. I don't even know if I call it alarming. It's just bizarre. Like they did a few tabs of acid and we're like, dragons.
All right. So what I think is really fascinating is the dragons that everybody draws in connection with this story. We're talking like 4 limbs and an extra set of wings, breathing fire. And that's a much newer idea of what a dragon is. The dragon, as we have written in the biblical text, the word drakon is a Greek word that means serpent. Usually a big sea serpent, something large that lives in the water, and serpentine.
Serpentine.
I feel very confident that its use here, though it may be meant to evoke images of the old Leviathan, I feel more like it's meant to evoke images of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, especially as this adversary of humanity.
And it ties it all nicely back to the beginning.
Right?
I like that. One of the theories that I read, again, from our resource from the Britannica website, is that it's actually a contemporary piece for the 1st century that is supposed to help Christians get through the persecution from Rome at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. The moral of the story, when you've read the whole letter, because it's written in an epistolary format mostly, at the end of it, you're supposed to come out of it having hope with this message that we're going to overcome this Roman persecution. So yeah, absolutely. It's supposed to help with that crisis of faith in a time when the Roman Empire is like, no, you need to worship our God Emperor as the only supreme God. And of course, Christians say, hey, we really don't want to do that.
As someone who's studied the Bible, this is a little off script, but is the Revelation, so we believe it's written by multiple authors, are any of those authors the same authors as other books of the Bible? Or is this like a total, I haven't made it this far. If anyone's listening, I'm on Samuel 1.
Every scholar who believes that the book of Revelation was written by multiple authors will reject that any of them had anything to do with writing the base text of anything else in the New Testament, though editors could certainly have been involved with multiple projects, including the Revelation of John.
Interesting. Yeah, it just feels like, again, I haven't read the whole Bible yet, but it feels like such an out there book, content and structure-wise.
It's wildly different from everything else in the New Testament, but familiar enough if you've gone through some of the cooler parts of the Old Testament.
Okay. Am I getting to the cooler parts in the Old Testament?
Oh, it'll be a little while. You got to get through history before you get to the prophecy books.
All right. I see you have some notes on Joel Osteen.
His name. Yes, I do.
His name.
Yes. So the interesting thing about the Revelation of John, and we've talked about how there's loads of doubt about the author, it was never at any time in human history, it was never popular in the lists of what counts as the Christian canon. And an awful lot of people have put an awful lot of time arguing against it for as long as it's been circulated. Also, I wanted to define the word canon, because it comes up a fair bit in the discussion of this book. So a canon means measuring stick, or the standard against which other things are measured. So for Star Wars fans, none of the books ever are canon. At no point in history were the books canon. The films are the canon against which you could judge if the books were truly part of the same continuity. In the same way, the huge amounts of Christian literature that have been created in the last 2,000 years, like the words of Polycarp and C.S. Lewis and Joel Osteen, they're evaluated for their content relative to what is in the scriptural canon, which is selected by committees over the course of centuries, eventually bringing us the New Testament as we have it today. And so centuries of arguing about what is really the foundational texts of our religion. It was super easy to adopt the four Gospels that are sitting at the front of the New Testament. It was super easy to adopt the writings of Paul, broadly speaking, but it took a lot of work to figure out which ones were genuine Pauline epistles. And the Epistle to the Hebrews is still a mystery text. It was ascribed to Paul for a while by a bunch of people, and now it's generally rejected that it definitely wasn't Paul that wrote the Epistle to the Hebrews, that kind of thing. So the history of this book of Revelation is flip-flop back and forth mostly. Mm-hmm. Dionysius in the mid-3rd century rejected the apostolic authorship of the book, but did admit that its author was inspired.
So he thinks it was a revelation, just not John the Apostle.
Right.
Okay.
And then about 100 years later, Eusebius included the book in his list of accepted books, but also included in his list of rejected books.
Oh, so he waffled on this.
Yeah. And we're not talking like decades apart or books apart, but like in the same text.
So he had a stack of accepted and a stack of rejected and just switched back and forth for
It was
Revelation.
in both stacks simultaneously for this guy.
Oh, wow. I can't decide today.
Like when he wrote on these are books that are good and these are books that are bad, in the same content lists, like he'd hand you a piece of paper, and on both sides of this piece of paper, one side good, one side bad, it's on both sides.
I love it.
Because it's a problem for people.
Yeah.
The Council of Laodicea in 363 omitted the book from the canon. Uh-huh. The Council of Rome included it, only 20 years later. And the Eastern Orthodox Council in Trullo in 692 omitted the book from the canon as well. It's still rejected by many Christian groups today. When we say the Christian New Testament, it's a lot more monolithic than the Old Testament, but there's still some issues there. We have smaller Christian groups that don't use the same New Testament either.
Well, and then there's just like how much stock you put in to the Revelation, right? There's churches that are entirely based. There's one in the West End. It's called the End of Days Church. Like it's entire right. We get these fire and brimstone preachers that base their entire doctrine on the Revelation, and then there's some who are like, yeah, it's allegorical.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and there's an awful lot of freedom when deciding how you're going to use a book, and sure, that makes sense.
I guess so.
The problem comes when you start doing things that hurt people or ruin people's lives with this book that was written so long ago.
Like I said, we'll get into it. And we were talking a little bit before we pressed record. Is how much people like put time and energy into this. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know I'm coming at it from an atheist perspective, but it's kind of terrifying. Yeah,
there's some weird ways in using this book.
Yeah, there and some we're going to talk about Christian Zionism, some dangerous ways people have used this book.
Yeah, one of my actually there's a lot of things I do like pointing out that are in this book to people who aren't as familiar with the faith that they like to throw on other people.
Lay it on me.
And one of these I mentioned a month or two back when we were talking about Satanism.
Yeah.
That the idea that Lucifer has to be this evil figure, and anytime you ever talk about Lucifer, as a good thing, you're automatically a Satan worshiper. Nonsense. People like to throw that at Freemasons because there was a couple of Freemason authors a couple centuries ago that really like to describe the philosophy of Freemasonry as Luciferian. And Lucifer means light bearer, and Lucifer is the poetic name of the morning star in Latin, referring to Venus or occasionally Mercury. Apparently some people get that confused, I guess. Mostly Venus. And the morning star, that symbol of a 5-pointed star, whether inverted or not, in old Christianity referred to Jesus. And this is actually illustrated in the Revelation of John.
Well, it was interesting to me because like morning star is not used a lot in the Bible. It's used twice, and once it's for Lucifer, king of Babylon, and once it's for Jesus.
Yeah.
Like those are polar opposites. So I thought that was a really interesting choice of language of all the things. And I mean, the Revelation goes on to call him the lamb and the lion and whatever. Of all the things, the only other reference in the Bible is to the devil, and you're calling him the morning star. And I know Lucifer's not the devil, but common perception is that Lucifer's a bad dude or a sexy dude. Tom Ellis, if you're listening, I'd love to interview. That's right, interview.
Yeah, no, I have to deny that Lucifer was ever used in the Bible to describe the adversary of God, except for the one situation where it describes the king of Babylon and his self-styled title that is equivalent to the morning star. Yeah. So that's my little thing.
What other fun facts do you like to throw at people about the Revelation?
One of the things that came up last time I talked about this in Sunday school, because I'm a Sunday school teacher as well, is this business about the 144,000. Some churches, including the Jehovah's Witnesses, will say this is how many people get into heaven. Jehovah's Witnesses cosmology and theology is super complicated, and the problem I have with it is that's not a thing that can be fairly pulled out of this text. We have 144,000 elders who go and do a particular work for the Lord in this text. And that's got nothing to do with who's going to heaven. That's not what this chapter addresses even, where this 144,000 are mentioned. What's interesting to me, though, is that the 144,000 is 12,000 from each of 12 tribes in Israel. But the list it gives of the 12 tribes of Israel is obviously written by either somebody who's not familiar with Israel or has a specific reason to exclude one particular group. Right. And that is still mysterious to me, because we have the list of the 12 tribes, and usually Levi is left out of any list of 12 tribes because Levi's descendants never received any city inheritance really apart from where they had their altars, so they could perform priestly duties among all of the people of Israel across all of the tribes. But this list in the Revelation includes Levi and excludes Dan for some reason. It includes Joseph, but excludes Ephraim, but does have Manasseh. That's a weird replacement thing, and maybe the name Manasseh is thrown in where Dan is supposed to belong. It's all really fuzzy. But what's really weird is that people use this exclusion of Dan in this list to say the Danish people are evil.
I believe that.
I'm Danish.
Fuck you.
So, problems.
Only for you.
And the entire nation of Denmark.
Well, they're atheists anyway.
Not all of them.
Predominantly.
More than a lot of nations,
they were going to hell anyway.
But the idea of identifying this one little group out of the nation of Israel to equivalent to another nation on the other end of Europe that is also kind of little is nonsense.
Well, also because it didn't exist, presumably, when the Bible was written.
I
It
don't
would have
know
been
when the
some
Kingdom
weird-
of Denmark was organized, but I feel like the Danish people were probably a people around this time.
I mean, yeah, but they would have been all small tribes. Like, we didn't really start to see
They
the
weren't organized the
formation
way
of
the Roman Empire
countries.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially in that part of Europe. Into like the 1200s is when what we would call countries now start to form. But yeah, in the 600s
Well, I mean,
and
the Roman
700s,
Empire
they would.
did stretch all the way to
I guess
England.
I was going to say Rome
already at
is
this
Europe.
time.
Yeah, Rome is Europe.
Pretty much.
It just doesn't feel like Europe back then. Is that weird to say?
It's not Europe as we knew it. I mean, we had the Roman Empire along basically everything in Europe except for the northern bits, which was the Germanic tribes. And honestly, I feel like they were probably more organized than we give them credit for, too.
Probably. Let's skip Christian Zionism now and come back.
All right.
That shouldn't be there. But let's talk about the content, the actual guts of this book. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but I listened to it 1.5 times. I didn't make it through the second time before
fine.
recording. And then I mean, obviously I did a whole bunch of research and I watched some wild videos on the Revelation. And from what I listened to, read, audiobook, versus the interpretations, I felt like there was not a lot in the book of which people would interpret into crazy things. Sorry. Into elaborate things. So, for example, like, I know the raptures from Revelation. I was like, okay, so where does it describe people being sucked up and their clothes being left behind and everyone else to suffer? And there's like 2 sentences. And it doesn't refer to any of it. I was like, how do we get this imagery of...
Let me Google that real quick.
I have it in my notes.
Do you?
Chapter 3, verse 10 is the Revelation. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. That's the rapture. That's what the entire Left Behind series is based on, is those 2 sentences.
No, that's not it at all.
Okay. Am I reading the wrong thing? No, that's what I read was the raptures, chapter 3.
So Matthew 24.
That's not the Revelation.
Right. But that idea, it comes from Matthew 24. The whole Left Behind titular idea.
Yeah, because
Not
I
the
have
whole book
Matthew
series.
24 right there.
Yeah. The book series expands and implements a lot of things taken from the Revelation, but that idea that one person can be taken up and the person right next to him not is from Matthew 24.
Okay, so then how does this work in like a Bible study context?
Oh, you have to lean heavily on what we call intertextuality, where you go flip back and forth between several different books and string together all these different ideas.
Couldn't you
And
make up whatever story you want?
if you're not extremely careful, yes.
Okay.
That's the wonderful thing about people who study books, I guess, is they will connect all kinds of ideas. I took a whole course on intertextuality with just different philosophic literature and books that people thought were supposed to be like deep philosophical dives, that when you read this book and also read Kant or Freud, then this changes the way you understand the book.
And it's like,
Yeah.
no.
And that is basically how most people read the Bible, because you've got a bunch of different prophets who say little bits of information here and there. You have to string them together if you want a solid image. And some people are really bad at that job and string together terrifying or awfully destructive images.
Yeah. But I was like expecting this, but having heard of Left Behind and A Thief in the Night, I was expecting like Revelation to be this big scary book, and I was like, oh,
No.
It talks about a really weird animal.
Mm-hmm.
with bear paws, which we'll get to, but that's about it. But I'm like, oh. And then Nero, which we'll also talk about. But like, other than that, I was like, this is not nearly the traumatizing book I was expecting. So cool.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of ideas that, because they're connected to the end of the world, we connect to the Revelation, and some of it is just not there, and that includes the whole the nitty gritty of the
details of the rapture.
The rapture, which is such a weird word, but yeah, intertextuality allows us to point to where in the timeline in Revelation, like it does give us a spot where if you understand that this thing is that thing, then that thing happens here in the story.
Which is why when I told you I was reading the Bible in order, you were like, that's not how it's done.
In chronological order, yeah, that's just not the way.
Well, I don't
it happens.
know what
People
other
have
way
done
to
it.
do
People put effort into it, but oh well.
That's why I'm audiobooking it. So the rapture's linked to the second coming.
Yes.
Let's talk about the second coming. Do all Christians believe in the second coming?
Not all Christians.
Do you?
Do I believe that Jesus is going to come back in a physical form and people are actually going to be able to notice that? Yeah. That is part of what I believe, yes.
Oh, interesting. All right, let's talk about that.
So the earliest point at which it was taught explicitly was immediately after he left. And before the epistles were sent out to all the people by Paul, before John wrote to his 7 churches, anything like that. The Acts of the Apostles, written by a fellow named Lucas, or Luke, as we commonly know him in English, he tells the story of how after Jesus spent 40 days after he died, hanging out with people, showing them, yeah, I'm alive again, check out my holes, whatnot. And he...
Phrasing, Preston.
The holes in his hands, the holes in his feet, the holes in his side.
Okay.
Those 5 holes.
Okay. Just
or
checking.
7. An odd number of holes.
Phrasing.
So he spent more than a month showing people and testifying that he truly was dead, buried, risen again. And then he ascends up into the sky. And Lucas tells us there was loads of witnesses, and the fact that the book is still around means that there's a lot of people who were like, yeah, no, I was there. I'm one of those witnesses. And we have no idea how many that would have taken to establish that, but we have it. And in that story, it tells us that there were also a couple of angels, messengers from heaven, who said, the same way you watched him go up, he's going to come down the same way. And then that idea has persisted pretty strongly among the vast majority of Christians ever since.
I feel like the second coming, and I guess this depends on how you take the Revelation. Mm-hmm. I feel like some people take the second coming like super seriously.
Yes.
That's probably a spectrum thing as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Like, I remember going to my friend's youth group, and I remember them like talking about how they like can't wait for Jesus to come back, and like that they have to be prepared because it could happen at any time. And I'm like, does everyone live their life like this?
In theory.
Is that in the forefront of your mind?
No.
All the time that like Jesus could come back tomorrow?
No.
Okay, 'cause that's how they were talking. They're like, I hope Jesus comes back in my lifetime, but I have to be prepared that he might not.
Like we talked about in our last episode with prophets, and a lot of people saying Jesus is coming right away, no warning, but also right away.
The like your in-laws.
Kind of.
All the time.
So the Revelation of John actually lays out this promise that you're going to have plenty of warning before Jesus shows up. Like, we've got a 7-year war. It's going to be absolutely awful.
Antichrist. We got weird animals.
Yeah. And Jesus shows up after this 7-year war. So if anybody says Jesus could show up any minute, I guess they believe that this 7-year war is already happening. But you've also got loads of other warning signs. Like, we have to have Christian prophets in Jerusalem for 3.5 years, and then they die in the streets. And then you've still got a few years warning. So anybody, like the fellow who said the world was going to end May 21st, 2011, the guy was seriously out to lunch.
Yeah, if this is where your belief is founded in, then yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I meant to talk about this later, but I feel like this is a good segue into Christian Zionism, which I think is terrible.
Yeah.
But that these Zionists are trying to force the second coming by making these things happen. And it feels really yucky to me. And I feel like Jesus wouldn't like that. I feel like Jesus doesn't want to come back that bad that we can kill a whole bunch of people in Palestine to force the second coming to happen.
Right.
Am I wrong?
See, I agree completely, because the way that any good Christian should be preparing for the second coming would be the exact same way they prepare for the eventuality of their death, of don't be a dick and things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because you could get hit by a truck tomorrow, a lot more likely than Jesus coming in tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
If we're committed to the 7-year time frame that the Revelation gives us, as an awful lot of Christians are, that be more worried about dying by surprise than being caught by surprise by Jesus.
Yeah. So a lot of Christians believe that the second coming is about to happen because the Jews took control of Israel in 1968. So they took control of Israel in 1968, but
It was a British
the nation of Israel started to form in the 40s after the war as a place for all the refugees to go. The United States is a huge funder and supporter of Israel because they're trying to force the second coming, which, again, that's just like...
I mean, it's not only that, but it's definitely including that.
Well,
You've also got a lot of faithful Jews hoping to
absolutely
fund the nation as well. But it's not just one thing.
Yeah. One of the stats I read is that Trump had voted that Israel was Jerusalem belonged to Israel, not to Palestine, in a UN vote, and only 9 other countries agreed with him, and the vast majority disagreed with him. And then, of course, there were some non-committal country votes. So,
well, for the most part, the UN, while recognizing the plight of Palestine, don't recognize Palestine as a nation.
No, it's not an official nation.
It's just like there's no country in the world that officially recognizes that there are 2 Koreas. Every country in the world officially sees one Korea and a rebel state. And depending on which country you're in, it depends which is the favorite, whether north or south. And it's a similar but also wildly different thing in the Near East.
Yeah, and you can do tours of Jerusalem, and they'll take you and show you where all the battles will happen.
It's a really weird thing to celebrate.
Okay, good, because I was like, I feel like this is really weird, and Christian Zionism is the best way I can describe it is creepy. The fact that you're willing to kill people, and we'll get into other parts of Revelations, and I'm like, this is just weird. And the fact that you're willing to kill people for it or aid in the killing of people for it is super weird to me. Bryant's sister, so they share a dad, but not a mom. Mm-hmm. Her mom and her new husband literally went to Israel to fight the crusade.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
to make it happen.
Alarming.
Yeah. And his sister was like, how do I get them back? She was trying to, that they had gone too far in their belief. And she was like, I need to get them back to Canada. But they wanted to be there, so I don't know what you do. Anyway, that's an anecdote. I don't know if I want to leave that in.
like, so generally, and I don't feel like this contradicts it, but it complicates it. Religion doesn't make people hurt other people.
This is an episode we're going to talk about.
But extremism and absolutism, which are more common in Christianity than in Buddhism, absolutely cause people to hurt other people. And this is an excellent example of that.
Yeah. It just like feels super yucky.
Yeah.
Ugh. All right. Well, thanks for that. That was me bringing up the downer topic of Christian Zionism. We have a lot of other imagery and symbolism and visuals and in Revelation that just like blew my mind.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbols and images in the book that it's weird how much the author or authors use Hebrew words instead of Greek words. Mm-hmm. Like the idea that the author uses har Megiddo instead of oros Megiddo. That's a little bit weird.
Could you elaborate for both me and our listeners?
Har is the Hebrew or Aramaic for mountain, mm-hmm. or mount, and oros being the Greek. It's just, there's a lot of little things in there that maybe they're deliberate evidence that the author was an Israelite or a Jew rather than a Roman. Who knows? We can't say with any real certainty anymore. But there's also a lot of imagery that is really kind of obviously informed by the Greek and Roman traditions. Mm-hmm. We've got these terrifying angels that come up out of the Euphrates, and to not see a parallel with the Greek Titans being released from Tartarus seems like a serious educational oversight.
See, and this is where, like you said, I'm going to have trouble being nice. Some of this imagery is fine if you think it's an allegorical or, you know, a metaphor or whatever. But the people who think this is literal, you lost me. Mm-hmm. Like when you think that there's a 7-headed beast with 10 crowns or 10 horns with 10 crowns, with feet of a bear, mouth of a lion, body of a leopard, and powered by a dragon. Like, what?
Yeah.
What?
That's the idea that it's not just symbolic is mind-boggling.
Okay, good. I mean, I'm not here to judge, but it's just like,
I am fully on the symbolic side of this argument for the revelation of John.
Yeah, and
if it's good at all, it's symbolic.
Yeah, and then there's other ones that I found. So like you said, the demonic angels in the phrase, and even like the angel Michael coming to fight with his sexy angel army. Sorry, I've been watching Lucifer. It's just like, what? Like, this is never, I mean, again, I've only read 6-7 books of the Bible, but like nothing of this level of drama has ever happened before in the Bible. I'm pretty sure. How often do dragons show up in the Bible? Like going through
animated dragons? Never.
Right? Like it just, you know, and like I'm on Samuel 1. So, you know, I'm going to have some good Bible stories under my belt. Like there's no angel armies.
Oh yeah, absolutely there
when?
are. The Lord of Hosts is a title that you've probably heard several times.
Uh-huh.
That is, hosts means armies.
Oh.
She's the god of angel armies.
When are they fighting?
I want to say that they show up mostly in prophetic literature later on, ahead of where you're at.
Okay.
But I could swear that there's some in the Torah where they talk about the support from angel armies. But I might be making things up.
I think
I might have to look that up.
It just feels like very dramatic in a way.
It's a very familiar idea to his audience. 100% sure.
Yeah, the angel armies are.
Yeah.
But the bear leopard.
No, that's
that's new.
more familiar than it is entirely new.
Interesting.
Ezekiel and Daniel use some pretty weird imagery like this as well. You'll get there. Don't worry.
I know, but my brain's just going and people think this is real.
It's symbolic. It's meant to be symbolic 100%. At least that's my position.
There's a barefooted beast at the door. Look at it. It's a dog-footed beast. I think it's a dog.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Numbers in Revelation are kind of an interesting thing. Like this 7 heads and 10 horns nonsense.
10 crowns on those 10 horns.
Yeah. It's the idea that it's not symbolic seems insane to me. But some people really want to see this monster. And so an awful lot of people have spent an awful lot of time creating art to represent this monster.
I saw some good ones, and I really liked how they tried to make 10 horns fit on 7 heads. I really appreciate the effort there.
Well, having 2 horns on one head is easy. 2 crowns on a head.
No, they put the crowns on the horn.
Of course. Because that way they hang properly. Yeah.
But I just like that some of the heads just had like 1 unicorn horn. Yeah. And then some of the heads some of the drawings I saw, they had like 2 unicorn horns.
Vertically stacked instead of sideways?
Some I saw were sideways.
I mean, we have rhinos, so saying they're vertically aligned isn't wildly inappropriate for the animal kingdom.
Yeah. God, Preston.
It's just seeing them on anything other than a rhino just seems
fair enough.
So wild to me.
So do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely I do. Absolutely. What's interesting, though, is that 7 plays really well into the theology of the audience. So the 7 for the good team is the 7-branch lampstand.
Oh, yeah.
The menorah of the tabernacle, of the temple, of all of the temples of Israel.
My brain didn't figure out it was a menorah because it talks about a lampstand.
Yeah.
And listening to it, and my brain never made the connection that it's a menorah. Thank you so much.
What's really annoying is that we often distract from that symbol by using candles. And though a lot of menorahs use candles, the one in the temple was an oil lamp with 7 branches.
Okay.
And so it's actually not that important, but it's annoying to me as a person who likes to look back, I guess.
Is that clear in the writings? Because I find a lot of this stuff is not clear unless you get intertextual.
The menorah is not super clear in this text to a reader who's not familiar with the context of the time. But on the other side of that, we have the 7 mountains or the 7 hills of Rome, which also translates to your 7 heads. And all of the 7 bad things are in direct opposition to the 7 good things. You got the 7 seals that are put in place by God, who is in charge of the 7-branch lampstand of the menorah. Yeah.
Was the number 7 just picked arbitrarily, or does it have a deeper meaning? Or are they giving it meaning by making it do all these things? Meaning. 7 years. Okay.
Yeah. There's an awful lot of writing of people saying that 7 is this number of completion. And it's interesting that Rome at the time consisted of 7 hills, but there's also a couple more hills. Either added later to the city officially, or they're just too small to be counted for a while, whatever. It's just an interesting thing, this idea of completeness, and this completeness extending to the full cosmos and the totality of life as we know it.
7 is my favorite number. If favorite numbers are a thing.
I don't know. Having favorite numbers seems kind of a weird position to hold.
Right, doesn't it? As a kid, I just like the number 7.
I can see how like a number would be a thing. Like if somebody said pick a number between 1 and 100, there's one number that you'll say more often than any other number.
But other than that, it's completely arbitrary.
Right?
It's kind of
just kind of
fun,
weird. Unless you have
when
like
you're 4.
synesthesia where numbers have a color and flavor
that'd
to
be
you, then it's perfectly reasonable, I guess. But for those of us who don't have that, it feels like a weird thing.
Preston's saying I'm weird.
Yeah, I am.
Rude.
I think we'll be just fine, though. But numbers are kind of interesting, and they definitely have specific meanings. And the trick is that because we're so far removed from the author and his actual intended audience, it's really hard to say what these symbols actually meant at the time for some of the things.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine numerology has changed a lot.
Garbage.
Already, I was going to say numerology is already garbage, and I'm sure it's changed a lot in 2,000 years. So what we give meaning to now might not be what we gave meaning to then.
Yeah. Numerology is I'll call it an interesting art form. To read numerology into something into which it was not written is what I will call stupid behavior.
Okay. And I thought I was going to be mean this episode.
But there's loads of great things that have been written with the intent of numerological readings. And then that's cool. But to read numerology into a thing where the author did not intend it, you're going to have a bad time.
That feels like a good segue into something the author did intend.
666.
That number of the beast.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. It's worth bringing up for this episode, though, that the number, almost every scholar, even the truly faithful Christian scholars who are just trying to understand the book, are willing to say, yes, this number 666 refers to Nero because of numerology and the values of the letters that make up his name in their mathematical system. 666 is also 616 in some versions of the text, matching up with an alternate spelling because of linguistic differences for the same dude's name.
You can literally find this on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
It will break it down for you very nicely.
Yeah, it's really helpful and nice for anyone who wants to doubt us,
Who
I guess.
disagrees.
Or for anyone who wants to learn more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go learn more instead.
Right? And I mean, Nero was an example of an emperor who was terrible to the Christians. And so this figure showing up in the text as the adversary makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Whether you're looking forward as a long distant prophecy or the immediate future and the things people are dealing with in the moment as they're reading this text anew, that's perfectly reasonable to include this figure that has recently died. People are afraid that somebody like him will come back, or even some people, back. Nero himself, could come back in their fears. And then, of course, we have the far opposite of reasonable interpretation of this number that's being imposed on the faithful and readily accepted by the heathens of people actually taking a number on themselves physically to represent their new fidelity to this false god. And you were talking a little earlier about something you had found in your researches that I think is great.
There's the Bible literalists that truly believe there is an Antichrist and a beast coming. Mm-hmm. Are we talking about the microchip?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was watching this video on YouTube, and it's from 2018. So
it's not even news.
Yeah, it's like, well, part of me was like, oh, microchip, it must have to do with COVID, but it's so old, it hasn't, like, pre-COVID, people were thinking about this. So one of this video, you can find it. It's called The Revelation Explained. It says that the Antichrist will give you the mark of the beast on your right hand. And I believe that is in the Bible, mm-hmm. that it's a right-handed mark. But the video is like, it will be a microchip. And I was like, where in the goddamn Bible does it say microchip? And then he's like, you're going to need it to buy fast food. I was like, where in the Bible does it mention McDonald's? Tell me. It just makes me angry.
So this is a slight extension to what we call intertextuality, where they take this idea and they apply it to the world that they're familiar with. So my bank card has a chip on it. I need it to make most of my purchases.
Correct. But if this is prophetic and literal, there is no microchip.
Correct. If you're going to take it exactly literally.
If you believe a bear pod leopard is coming back, you don't get a microchip. I'm serious.
Agreed.
You don't get both.
Yep. But
sorry.
So it's interesting to watch people make these arguments. It's definitely a symbolic thing. Even the mark on your hand
or your forehead.
And it's probably an and situation.
Oh.
So the Pharisaic tradition had Jewish people wearing phylacteries on their foreheads and their arms.
That's a big word.
Yeah. So phylactery is a little box that's usually got a little piece of scripture.
Oh, yeah, I've seen
yeah.
Jewish people wear that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of the Pharisaic tradition. It continued with the rabbis and is part of mainstream Judaism today. Well, more conservatives than liberals, though. And you'll still see it all around.
And I think it's just during prayer. Like, they don't walk around with it all the time.
No, not all the time. No.
For
but
worship.
So the audience of this book, and when it was first published, would have been very familiar with that symbol of having a mark for your God on your forehead and on your hand. And so this idea that there would be a replacement forced upon you by this God emperor and the new state religion, it's not wildly outside of their understanding, but the way we interpret it without intertextuality and just putting it in a modern context has definitely caused some problems.
Like you said, you just don't get both.
No.
That doesn't fly with me.
No weird chimeras and microchips. It's one or the other.
Yeah, if you're going to take the Bible literally, then you don't get a microchip.
Agreed, 100%. But also the idea of forcing people to get these microchips implanted in them or they can't participate in society sounds ludicrous. How do you get the mainstream of the majority of population to get on board with this?
We just did it, Preston, with the COVID vaccine.
Oh, no. If you think there's microchips in the vaccine, we have bigger problems.
I mean, the entire population of the world has a cell phone, so.
I mean, you're awfully close to true. And
it's in my right hand right now.
I keep my phone in my left pocket most of the time.
Oh. There you go.
So, oh well.
And you need it to participate in society.
At this point, this is true.
So now we just wait for the 7 Years' War to start and we're good to go.
I mean, there's an awful lot of the markers in this revelation. Like we talked about with Nostradamus, there's a lot of things that if you reword them just right, they are things that have already happened.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Hitler's, an easy one for the Antichrist because he was persecuting Jews.
Right.
Lots of people thought Trump was the Antichrist. A lot of people thought Trump was the Messiah. I'm pretty sure I've seen Justin Trudeau referred to as the Antichrist.
Honestly, at this point, any leader of any government is probably going to be called the Antichrist by somebody. And you can quote me on that and just check the news on a regular.
Right? So, yeah, in that way, there's a lot of, I'm sure there's other historical rollouts of things that might have looked like the microchip, the COVID vaccine, or the mark of the beast.
Well, we initiated the social insurance.
Oh, right, I did see that, yeah.
Ages ago. People freaked out about that. They're giving us numbers. Yeah, because we got 42 million John Smiths in the world. We can't just have them all confusing each other in the government.
Yeah. That's funny. And I saw some crazy math on how the social insurance number related to the number of the beast because it was divisible by 6 or I don't know. I was like, you're really stretching, but
it's 9 digits.
But 3 groups of 9 digits and 3 and 9 is 6 in the middle.
Just reminded me of Bowfinger with Eddie Murphy. At the beginning of the movie, he's stressing out because he's an actor within this movie, and he got a script for this new show he's supposed to be in, and he counted all of the K's in the script, and it was perfectly divisible by 3, and that's an outrage because obviously Eddie Murphy is a black man,
and that means the KKK.
Yeah, it was a really funny scene and a great way to throw shade at the way people read things into things that they shouldn't be reading into them. But it was great. Another thing that popped out to me fairly recently, actually, as I was going through the Revelation, is wormwood. It shows up a couple of times.
I saw that, yep.
And for a long time, I was just like, yeah, it's bitter. I've spent a lot of time looking at the Greek text of the New Testament.
Yes, you have.
And only recently has it jumped out to me that the word that we're actually looking at is absinthe.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I just thought that was a fun little thing to throw out there. That all of the waters into which this star that falls from heaven fall turns into absinthe.
So we better get some sugar and a lighter. That's what I'm hearing.
It helps the absinthe go down. The bottomless pit is a symbol that we see in the Revelation, and fairly often throughout a lot of religious texts, actually. It's a mysterious and powerful symbol that, based on those virtues alone, keep us from giving a better translation of what we see in the Greek text. In fact, it's an endless grave, which is, spiritually speaking, a much better symbol. And, Christ is supposed to resurrect all of mankind as it's laid out in this book. And so the endless grave is defeated, but the serpent is thrown into this endless grave. Oh. Some nifty symbology that's actually lost when we translate it as bottomless pit instead of endless grave.
I like that.
Right?
That's a fun fact.
Yeah. There's honestly so much in this book that's actually fun to unpack, but that's not the focus of our show, and it would take so many episodes and hours to go through what all in this book, and that's not what the Holy Watermelon's about.
Though we do have our Bible study Patreon episodes, which eventually we'll get to Revelation.
Maybe we might take some slow time there and let it burn and sizzle.
Yeah, you can fire and brimstone me.
Okay. Those shifty eyes make me wonder if you read something into that I don't.
I was going to say phrasing, Katie.
Yeah, it's...
So I don't know if this conversation is going to go anywhere, this question, but part of me wants to talk about the people who take this so seriously. Mm-hmm. And again, it creeps me out. I feel like I should pull up the comments on this YouTube video, which again, it's the Revelation Explained 2018. YouTube is about an hour and 45 minutes. One lady was saying, she doesn't want to be microchipped and she doesn't know she's going to be strong enough to say no. And she doesn't want to be beheaded. And then someone was like, yeah, it's going to be really hard to watch your child starving and still say no to the microchip. Okay, Preston's shaking his head. And my brain cannot expand that far to understand that.
It just seems like a ludicrous thing that so many people are genuinely afraid of that being our reality. And it just doesn't seem possible at all. Beyond plausible, it seems like it could never happen, especially when we have a whole bunch of atheists who will actively prevent this from happening.
Yes. Yeah.
And the single biggest group of religions on this planet identify as Christian. So is it really going to be that bad? I'm going to say no.
Well, and you say that, but it's so interesting because it's basically a wall of I, John Smith, take Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. Like that's 95% of the comments. And then there's like a few discussions. And someone commenting is like, I would like really like to, you know, be raptured, but I know I'm not worthy because I'm spending my time on YouTube instead of like gospeling it up. And I was like, I just don't. This leads probably better into our next episode than into this episode. But like you said, I'm a pretty open-minded person. And I also think I'm a pretty intelligent person, and my brain cannot go there.
I feel very confident in saying that if you are more concerned about the second coming than literally anything else, then like if that's the number one concern in your life, you're living your life wrong. If you are a Christian, then basing your life on any writings in the Bible other than the words of Jesus saying, live right with God and with your fellow man, love your neighbors, you're not doing it right. If you go out doing good in your community and you're worried about all of these terrible things coming based on what you read in the Revelation of John, the New Testament also tells us the faithful don't have anything to worry about.
I just don't see how that's healthy.
It's not healthy. The healthy choice is going out and loving your neighbors, being a good neighbor.
Aw.
But I guess a lot of people would rather focus on literally anything else other than the need to be good to the people that they just can't stand. And way too many people use a handful of cultural elements of the Bible and the world from 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago to make decisions on how they're going to be a neighbor to the people around them. Nonsense.
Nonsense, he says.
I don't know, there's so many things that people want to say are more important in the Bible than the things that Jesus say, and that's weird.
I mean, that's an episode for another day.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I really enjoyed learning about the Revelation.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting book.
You're right, it is a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But the audiobook, if anyone is interested, is on YouTube. A great way to consume it and then, yeah, do some digging on it because there's a lot in there, including a barefooted leopard.
Yeah. It's like Nostradamus, we talked about a couple weeks ago. John incorporates a lot of elements from the culture in which he is immersed. But unlike Nostradamus, he actually does use those images to create new ideas that aren't found anywhere else. And an awful lot of people, for the entirety of its history, have said, you know what? This book's pretty dubious. Maybe it doesn't belong in the Bible.
This book's pretty wild.
Yeah, it is. It is wildly different from the books around. In the New Testament, it is unique as far as whole books. We've got Matthew 24 and a couple other sections of the New Testament that are a little revelatory, but not quite like this book is. But ultimately, the Apocalypse of John does not describe the end of the world, but instead promises a very rough transition into a long-lasting paradise, which is really easy to forget when you focus on all of the really cool images in the book.
I think that's a good summary too, because I think that's accurate regardless of what you believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the most equitable, safest society globally that we've ever had. I'm not saying that there aren't problems.
But we're on our way.
Yeah. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I know sometimes it's hard to remember that when we watch the news, but hey, we don't crucify people anymore, so that's
right?
cool.
We haven't beheaded anybody with a guillotine since shortly after Star Wars first came out. 77 was the last time that somebody was beheaded with a guillotine.
Oh.
I mean, We still electrocute people to death.
Oh, I know.
For fun. Tell me that nobody shows up to these electric chair executions in the audience.
Oh, I mean,
It's happening.
I believe that. But it's not fun for everyone.
It's not fun for everyone. Executions have never been fun for the participants except for St. Lawrence.
Is that another saint that shouldn't be a saint?
I have no issues with St. Lawrence based on the things I know about him right now,
Okay.
but his execution, he made a joke of it in the moment.
All right. Respect.
St. Lawrence is a champ. Prophecies are an interesting thing, but just like we talked about last time, the last 112 popes, for most Protestants, this revelation is describing the fall of Rome and also the fall of the Roman Catholic Church. But since Francis the Tolerable is not Peter the Roman, as we discussed before, the fall of the Roman Church is not right away. And, I mean, statistically speaking, Pope Francis has got, 5 years left? Tops?
I think he'll last longer.
He might.
He's a godly man.
If he lasts more than 5 years, that makes him the second oldest pope to die.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I feel like he's got more spunk in him than the last two.
Yes, I agree fully with that.
So I feel like he'll live a long time. You know who should be pope if you want a long time pope?
Somebody who's under 50.
I was going to say Queen Elizabeth. Because she's never going to die.
It feels that way some days.
I will say, in summary, do not be concerned about the end of the world.
Yeah, if you're stressing about the end of the world, you are focusing on all the wrong things. You could die tomorrow. Are you ready for that? I'm not.
I'm not.
But, I mean, the end of the world, I mean, maybe we'll get hit by a surprise meteorite. You never know what's going to happen in the future. Don't worry about it. Live right. Enjoy your life.
Don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick. And I think everything's going to be fine.
And buy. Oh, we don't have a Don't Be a Dick t-shirt yet. But we do have other great merch on our Spreadshirt.
Yeah.
And
check out our Discord where we have great discussions. We can talk about this further.
And we have a Patreon.
Yes.
So you can support us with a small monthly donation into the collection plate.
You get exclusive content, and you help support us and keep the show going for a long time, which is what we really want to do. Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.
God is near.